So the first set of hands that I want to talk about are situations where we are the pre-flop raiser and we get a pretty good flop or a pretty good situation to continuation bet. Now, those situations are you're either heads up or the board is, I guess, scary enough or it seems to hit your range well enough for you to continuation bet. So here to kick off, we've got pocket threes on the button. And I decided to pop it up for a couple of reasons. One, we're fairly deep. So I think we're effectively, looks like 140, a little bit more than 140 BBs deep, or right around 140 BBs deep. And I'm going to be in position. And if I do hit a set of threes, then I want to play a big pot. So the only way for me to play a big pot if I do hit a set of threes is to go ahead and start building it now. And I'm also pretty deep with the people in the blinds. So I want to charge them for entering the pot as well. So the original raiser folds and the flop comes Jack 7-4 with a flush draw. So he's often going to check to me, and I'm going to be continuation betting a wide range of flops. And this is certainly one that I'm going to continuation bet on, being in position, and he folds. So the next hand, I've got deuces, and here's a little bit different situation, but I'm still raising it for a couple of reasons. One, if it was limped around to me, this time we've got two short stacks. This guy's really, really short, and we've got a pretty short person on the button. But I feel like if it limped around to me, I would still raise the deuces on the button. I mean, I guess if I had to read that this guy's playing crazy, like 40-30, then I would probably fold my deuces on the button. But I did not have an indication that this guy's getting out of line. And if I do hit a set, then again, I want there to be a pot, already kind of a bigger pot there. So 75 cents is what I would raise normally on the button. And everybody folds except for the original raiser, and he actually open folds to me, which is very nice. But this would be a flop that I would continuation bet because it's going to be hard for him to continue on this flop without an ace or a king or a flush. So that's the second hand. Now the next hand, I've got pocket sixes, and I do a standard raise on the button, and I'm called by the big blind. And this is just a dream flop to continuation bet. It's about as disconnected as they come. The only draws are gutter draws, and this is certainly a flop that I'm going to be continuation betting on. And I do, and he folds. So now I raise pocket sevens, and I'm called by a pretty, I guess a pretty normal stack. Now this is a very connected flop, and I was actually debating whether to continuation bet it or not. But if I'm the pre-flop raiser, then I'm almost always going to be continuation betting this. Now, if one of these two guys in the blinds had called as well, then I would definitely not be continuation betting this flop because it figures that they're going to be calling with hands. At these limits, a lot of these players are going to be calling with hands like Jack 9, Queen 9, King 10, King 9, which they're often going to have a pair and a gutter or some kind of two pair or a straight on this board. But against one player who seems pretty standard, this is I would say his call on the blind could mean a lot of smaller pocket pairs or little suited connectors which don't connect with this board. So I'm going to take a stab at it and see what happens. And in this case, he ends up folding. But against two people, this would be a bad board to continuation bet. So now I raise fives under the gun, and I'm called in two spots by, let me pause it. I'm called in two spots by the button and the big blind. But because I'm raising under the gun, this just hits. This is just another very good flop for me, where it's king high. There is a flush draw out there. There's really no other draws other than a gutter, so this is going to be a good flop for me to continuation bet. And once I'm raised, that's the nice thing about pocket pairs. It's just going to be really easy for me to play, because this hits so much of my perceived range, and now he's raising the flop. Um, I would say, I mean, he definitely has me crushed. Um, I'm guessing he either has something like a king queen himself, or a set of twos or sixes. There's not really a lot of other hands he can represent on this flop. I mean, I guess he could have the ace high flush draw, but this is certainly a flop that I want a continuation bet. And once I'm raised, it's going to be very easy for me to get away from. So, all right. And in our final hand, I raise pocket sixes and I'm called by the button. And again, this is a very good flop for me to continuation bet. It's got an ace and a king, and I expect that he's going to be folding out a lot of the hands that he's cold calling with, like 10-9, queen jack, sevens, I guess all smaller pocket pairs than I have. And if I'm raised on this flop, it's going to be very easy for me to get away from, which in fact happens. So I'm just going to give him credit for that. So that's a collection of pocket pairs where I was the original raiser, and I didn't really flop anything, but there's just a mixture of flops which I decided to continuation bet. So the next set of hands that I'm going to show you are hands where the flop texture or the situation is not a very good one for me to continuation bet. And I just decided to check it down. You usually check fold or just go try to see a cheap showdown. All right, so for the next section, I'm going to look at situations where I raised the small pocket pair and the flop or the situation is not a very good one for me to continue with my aggression. So, for example, so here we actually have a limper, and I decide to raise him and am called in two spots. And the flop comes 8-10 king with a flush draw. Now, against just one player, I'm going to be continuation betting this very often because it's got a king on there, and his limps could mean small pocket pairs, small slotted connectors, probably hands that miss this flop, um, and it's just going to be profitable. Now, but against two people, I don't think continuation betting this flop is going to be profitable because of the number of draws, and I expect them to be peeling with even hands like Jack 10, which could potentially improve on the turn, and are like weak marginal hands. So against two players, I don't think continuation betting deuces here is going to be profitable. So it goes check, 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 and the turn brings a 5, and the original limper decides to bet, and we both just fold. So in the next situation, once again, I raise threes from the cutoff, and it's actually a three-way pot. Now, this is a much better flop for me to continuation bet. But against two people, there's just, I feel like it's almost too connected. There's a lot of like pairs and gutters they could be calling me with, like king queen, jack 10, etc., etc. Especially against the short stack. So with the short stack in there, I don't like continuation betting this board. So it goes check, 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 and the turn brings a 10. Once again, I choose not to continuation bet because it just any king's gonna call me, and it goes check down, and the button had Jack 10, which I certainly don't think he's gonna be folding on the flop because he's got a pair and a gutter. So here I'm called in two spots, um, both from the blinds, and the player in the small blind leads out min, and the player in the big blind calls. So again, this is one of those situations where I feel like they're both probably weak, but they both probably caught a piece of the flop that I think they're going to be drawing with. So if I'm just not going to like any kind of turn, and a lot of turns could improve them. So this is one of those situations where I raise under the gun because it's I want to raise small pocket pairs under the gun, but it pretty much I'm looking to hit a set against two people or hit a favorable flop. And this is just not a situation. I mean, like I said, I could raise here, but I just expect one or both of them to be peeled with a lot. And then I've got a really, really weak hand and an inflated pot. So it feels kind of weak folding here, but I feel it's correct. So I just fold, and the turn brings a deuce, and this guy check, and we'll get a fold. All right. So this time I decide to limp the pocket fours. The we had somebody post out a position, and we had a limp, and I decided to play a four-way pot in position with pocket fours. I could certainly raise this, but I felt like this guy was just a little bit too short for me to be raising, and I just decided to like limp it. I mean, essentially, it's kind of similar to if I was in the small blind, I would probably limp this. Um, I've got this board just hits too many hands, which could potentially peel, and just decided to play it for set value. I could have raised this pre-flop, but thought calling was fine in this situation. So here we have a four-way pot, and this would be a great flop for me to continuation bet into, definitely into one person, perhaps even into two people. But I feel like continuation betting it into three people is just a very bad idea, because I think somebody's going to have a piece. Somebody probably has an ace, which they're not going to fold. Um, I think even with a hand like Ace King, more often than not in this situation, it's a bet fold situation. Um, but with pocket sixes and three people, it's just a bad situation to be continuation betting. So it checks around, and this guy leads out for about a third of the pot and gets called, and he check folds the river. So, all right. The second to last hand, I've got pocket sevens, raise in under the gun +1, and this time around, the flop's not very connected. It's got I mean, it's got two aces, and except for that, I've got an overpair to them. And this player leads out for a little bit less than half the pot. Now, I could raise here, but I think I'm ahead. And if I think I'm ahead, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a move on the turn on him. So, and I also want to know what if I raise here. Let's say I raise to 4, and this guy shoves, then he'll almost always have an ace. But if and I mean, like, I guess essentially, if I think this guy's weak, and I'm not really afraid of this guy coming along, so I decide to make my move on the turn. So this time he bets, once again, he bets half pot on the turn, and I min raise him for a couple of reasons. One, I am happy to take the pot down right now, and two, if I raise him on the turn, I guess I could raise him more. I could raise him to like 6 or so, but I think that he's not going to have anything, and I don't want him drawing me on the river. And by raising here, I'm essentially buying myself a showdown on the river. So, but he just folds pretty quickly, so I guess he didn't have anything. All right. So finally I've got pocket sixes, which I decide to check, and I decide to lead this flop because I've got second pair to the board, and there's a flush draw out there. Somebody with a jack is certainly not folding. Somebody with a four might come along. Um, on the turn, I'm not sure if he's got a jack or not, but I don't see much value in leading. I think that if I if I check and he bets, he almost always has a jack. But if I check and he has a flush draw, then he's going to check behind very often. So he checks behind on the turn, which makes me believe that he's got a flush draw. Now on the river, I decide to check and he bets $1. So I call it given my read, and he did in fact have a jack, which is slow played. But I feel like on a flop like this with pocket six, it's going to be profitable for me to lead out because especially in a three, people pretty much no card can come on the turn which I'm gonna like, other than a six, and I feel like I'm gonna be good enough, often enough, to make it profitable. All right, so the next situation is that wonderful situation where we either raise or call, and we end up with a set. So those are always the fun spots to be in. So I raise under the gun, and I'm called in two places. And the flop comes, gives me bottom set with a flush draw and some straight draws out there. So I decide to bet $1.75 into 235 and am raised. So we're about 100 BBs deep, and when I'm raised in this situation, this is a draw more often than not. This guy's pretty deep, so I would expect him to be fairly competent. But unless he has pocket sixes, I'm more than comfortable getting it in on the flop. And there's a lot of turn cards that I don't want to see, and there's a lot of turn cards that could kill the action. So I would much rather just re-raise it right here. So I make it 10, not that much more. I do this to give him an opportunity to still come over the top and shove. So if he has some kind of a flush draw, or if he's bluffing, then I mean, some people, if you give them just a little bit of rope, they're going to use it to hang themselves, and I am giving him pretty good odds. Like if he's on a draw, I am giving him pretty good odds to hit. But if he wants to shove, I want to give him room to shove, and I want to continue putting money in the pot in a situation where I think I'm ahead. But he flat calls, and the turn gives me the nuts. So now I've got $17 left, and I want to figure out how much to bet. I expect him to check to me here, and I want to figure out how much to bet so that I can shove whatever river and give him odds to draw to whatever he's drawing. So I bet 575, which is going to make the pot a little bit more than $30 on the river. And if he's on a flush draw, if he's on a straight draw, and he makes his draw, then the pot's gonna be like over 30 something dollars, and he's gonna be getting like 4-1. So I think he's gonna I would expect him to call. Now I think against a good player that bet just screams strength, but I think against most 25 and L players, it's just an enticing bet. So the river's a great river because it completes all kinds of straight and flush draws, and I've got just enough to shove. So he checks to me, and I shove the remainder of my stack, and he calls me. and he was actually a lot. No, never mind. He was not live on the turn. I thought he might have been live on the turn because, but he did end up hitting his, um, he did end up hitting his flush draw. So he was on a flush draw in the last hand. Okay, so we've got a limped pot. So there's two limpers, and a pretty reasonable player raises the button. So I guess Full Tilt has this new auto reload feature that Stars doesn't have. So that's why I don't have a full stack. But both of these guys are have more than full stacks. So if I call, I expect both of them to call along as well. So I decide to call and get a multi-way pot with my small pocket pair, which is the ideal situation to be in with small pocket pairs. Now the flop gives me my set on a pretty drivey board. Now I can, in fact, I probably should lead this board, but I think somebody's gonna lead it for me. So because of that, I decide to check. If I lead this, I will lead this with a wide range of hands, including sets. Um, but in this situation, I just expect somebody to bet, and it goes check check. This guy bets $1, which is a really 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 weak bet, and I decide to raise him because I think he's going to be betting $1 with just a huge wide range of hands, and there's a lot of turns that I don't want to see, so I want to go ahead and now I want to take control of the hand, and he calls me, and the turn it's not a it doesn't really change anything. I mean 5-7 flopped the nuts, so the 3 doesn't really change anything. So now I want to bet a little bit more in order to. So I bet leaving myself just enough to shove any river, and I'm still giving him pretty good. I mean, if he has a flush draw, he's going to be incorrect to call. If he's got a straight draw, he's going to be incorrect to call on this flop. But I'm giving myself just enough so that I can shove the river. But in this case, he folds. So, all right, I've got a limper, and oh, never mind, that's not a limper. That's 25 NL. Under the gun raise, and I call on the button with pocket twos. If I was in the small blind and this guy was a good player, if he was a pretty loose player, I would probably fold my twos. If he was a tight player, I would probably call because I would expect him to have big overcards, or I would expect him to have a lot of overpairs, and I would expect him to stack off to me on a flop where he flops an overpair and I flop a set. Whereas if he's a loose and aggressive player, it's just not going to be profitable for me to play in the small blind, but certainly in position on the button, it is going to be profitable. And we see a three-way pot where I hit bottom set with no real draws. So Smoothie leads out for 75 cents, which is a really, really weak bet. Now, Isnak should probably raise him with a huge range of hands, but he just ends up folding, which I guess shows you how effective the little donk bet is in a multi-way situation. But I decided to raise because I expect him to call me with a huge range of hands, and in order for us to get all the money in by the river, I'm going to have to raise at some point, and I figured raising small now is about as good of a time as any. I could call, but I think if he's going to be leading out, he's going to have something marginal like a 5 or a jack, or maybe even pocket eights that he will choose to peel at least one street. So he does call, and the turn doesn't really change anything. It puts another overcard out there, but as far as I'm concerned, I still have the nuts. He checks to me, and I bet 750, which is about 3/4 spot. I should probably bet, like, I still don't expect a jack to call, but I should probably bet a little bit less just to give him better odds. I think a better bet would have been something like 650 or 625, just to milk it along, and it would. So if I bet 650 there, that's going to give us $22 on the river, and I could still shove the river there. So I guess there's no draws on here other than I guess other than 3-4. So I'm not really worried about him catching anything on me. Um, so I should probably bet a little bit less just to milk him. But he ends up folding, and I end up taking the pot, which I'm happy with. I mean, I guess he must have had something like pocket fours or pocket sixes or something like 5-6 and failed to improve on the turn. All right, so next we've got pocket fours and a limped pot, and here I'm more than happy to see a flop, and I'm more than happy to see this flop. So I'm definitely going to lead with all the draws out there. I lead for roughly pot, and I'm called by the short stack. Now, my plan is just to get it in as by the river, and it's going to be pretty easy with this guy being a short stack. But now I just bet half the pot, um, just following my plan of making sure that I can get everything by the river. And if he wants to push over the top, let him push over the top, which he does with King 8, and he ends up drawing dead. So the final hand, I've got pocket twos, standard button raise, and I get two people that call. The flop it's pretty draw heavy, but gives me bottom set, which I'm very happy about. And Toomless here leads for half the pot, and he's min raised by MDK 212. So I think Toomless is weak, and I think MDK 212 might have some kind of like marginal 7 or some kind of a draw. So given all that, figuring that one of them might be on a draw, I want to go ahead and start getting some money in there. So I make it 675. Toomless folds and MDK calls. Now the turn completes the flush draw. So if MDK was on a nut flush draw, then he just got there. So if I bet here and I'm check raised, I'm just gonna hate life because he's gonna have the flush almost always. Now on the other hand, I'm ahead of a lot of other hands. So if he's got some kind of a marginal 7, then he might improve to something a little bit better on the river and be able to pay off a value bet. Now by checking here, I also give myself a chance to fill up on the river. So if he has a flush here, then we're probably going to get all the money in on the river when the board pairs anyhow, because he's going to try to value bet his flush, and I'm just going to shove with my boat. On the other hand, if he has something really marginal like a 7, he's probably not going to bet this turn, or I mean, he's probably not going to call a bet on the turn by me here. Now, by checking behind, I'm risking another club to come, and if he has something like ace 7 with the ace of clubs or 7-8 with the 8 of clubs, then yeah, he could suck out on me ever so often. But I think the benefits of checking here, by checking here, I also just kind of disguise the strength of my hand. All right, so I do decide to check, and the river's a blank. So I mean, I guess if he had 6-4, then 6-4 gets there. But now I'm gonna see if he bets huge here. If he puts me all in here, then I'm in a really tough situation, and a lot of it will have to do with what kind of a read I have on this player. But he does decide to check. So when he checks, almost sure that I've got the best hand. He doesn't have a straight and he doesn't have a flush. So now I want to value bet, and it's just a matter of how much I want to value bet. And I'm actually not very happy with my value bet size. I bet, um, actually, I put him on something like a 7-8 or a 6-7 or something like that. So I figured this would be a bet size that he would call. Um, and yeah, actually, now that I think about it, because I thought he had kind of a marginal hand on the flop, even like an ace 7, then I figured he would call $10, but he might not call if I push all in, and maybe I could bet something like $12. But he does call, and he had pocket queens and he slow played them. So I think the big decision there was the decision to check the turn. Um, Given the stack sizes, I had about a pot size bet left, and like I said, if he check raises me on the turn, he has a flush, um, and I'm just in a bad situation. So all right, so that concludes my little segment. That's in my couple thousands of hands that I played at 25 and All Stars recently, and I did not flop that many sets with my small pocket pairs, but that's just life. So in this segment, I want to talk about the implied odds with pocket pairs, as well as some situations where you just want to peel a card because you think you might have the best hand, but you're just not very sure. But basically, I'm just looking to get in and see a flop for very, very cheap. And if I hit my set, then I'm looking to play a big pot. And if I don't hit my set, but I think I might have the best hand, then I'm looking to play a very small pot. That's the general basic strategy with small pocket pairs, and I don't think I'm saying anything that nobody here knows. All right, so here I call pocket fours in position against a pretty reasonable player, and it's actually not a bad board for my hand because I think this is a board that he's going to be continuation betting it with a lot of hands. So you could have any kind of high cards. I mean, he'll be continuation betting this board with a huge range of hands, and I think I'm good here more often than not. I think I think raising here is I mean, I could certainly raise here sometimes, pretty much have him fold out the majority of his range, but I just select to call, and the turn brings the flush. So we check it down, and the river brings the 9, and he checks, and of course I don't see any value in betting. I'm just looking to show down this hand, and he had pocket twos, so he had the only pair that I beat. I think sometimes I could bluff raise this flop, um, but against this straightforward player, I pretty much think that he's got 6 outs if anything, and I've got position, so I'm not afraid to go to showdown. So just looking to play small pots with my small pocket pairs. All right, the next hand, let's see. Pocket fives. Oops. Let me go back to the last hand. All right, pocket fives. There's a pretty big raise, but I still have um, I still have really good odds to call with my pocket fives and hope to spike a set. I'm not sure what the big raise means, but $1.35 is certainly good enough for me to go set mining. Now this guy like min re-raises, which I have no idea what it means. But after Red Canyon calls, I've got great odds to hit a set. And Red Canyon probably does not have a premium hand here. If he had, I think, jacks or higher, I think he would 4-bet to isolate, but I am going to have position, and I still have really good odds against Red Canyon, so I do decide to call. And the flop brings, misses me. Um, Double V shoves, Red Canyon folds, and I fold. But I thought pre-flop in both situations, I was getting pretty good odds to set mine, so I just decided to go set mining. I'm guessing this guy had like aces or kings. Just kind of played it kind of donkish. All right, so this is pretty marginal. I think if it was a button open, I would probably fold it, but against an under the gun razor with a full stack, I expect him to have a pretty um, fairly tight range until I see differently, and I think that it's going to be profitable for me to call, especially at the low stakes. I think as you go up in stakes players, you calling there is going to mean that you've got some kind of a pocket pair. But at these stakes, I think people are still just mostly thinking about their hand, and it's if I do hit my set, then and he's got some kind of an overpair, then I am going to get a stack. So the flop is a pretty low flop, and it certainly looks like it could hit my range, but I just decide to check call, and I think I think against a lot of players I'd be check raising here, but I think this is another one of those situations where I think I'm good, and I'm just looking to play a small pot with my pocket pair. The turn gives me a gutter, and it goes check check, and the river is a jack, and it goes check check, and he had ace 6. So against somebody who's going to be opening up ace 6 offsuit under the gun, um, I'm certainly going to be folding fours in the big blind in the future because I'm just not going to hit often enough to make it profitable. But I think a lot of players will show up there with something like ace king, ace queen, king queen, etc., etc. So I think peeling one on the flop. If I do decide to call pre-flop with pocket fours, I think this is a good board for me to at least peel a card. And if he was to bet again on the turn, I would fold because my fours, I'd be looking to hit a gutter, which wouldn't even be to the nuts. You might be on a flush draw. So basically looking to play a small pot with a small pair. But in the future, to his under the gun opens, if his range is so wide, I'm just going to be folding fours unless it's a multi-way pot. So those are just some of the more marginal situations that I was in with my small pocket pairs. But basically, I was looking to play small pots with my small pairs. So, all right.